Particularly when I birthed it from nothing but a concept, and that's really children, isn't it? That's that's what we do, and we commit our whole lives to a child, and that's exactly what I did. And actually, one of the reasons why I sold the company as well was because of that. The dedication I had given it for 6 years, and raising a real child is definitely way harder on different levels. But I mean, man, I sometimes I say I near killed myself doing that.
Today's episode is brought to you by Applaudible.net. G'day everyone. Today's episode I'm joined by Melissa Haupt, who is a female entrepreneur who about 6 years ago established her own product line and built a staff of around 20 full-timers and 2,000 sales representatives. Within a space of 2 years, she had created for herself a multi-million-dollar company, and after 6 years, she decided with the investment that she created that she would sell that business, and she's now embarking on a new enterprise. The new enterprise is helping employees and employers increase engagement in the workplace. And this is something she's extremely passionate about, given her experience as a business owner, and something that she practiced in the building of her former brand, Lillian. We're now going to sit down and have a little bit of a chat with an extremely passionate businesswoman, Melissa Haupt. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me here, Craig.
No worries. I always appreciate everyone's time, so thanks for being here and sharing your knowledge and experience with our audience. I want to start with a little bit about yourself and explain. Firstly, I'll just say you're a businesswoman and you've been successful in building a business which you recently sold, but you've seen an opportunity to help others in the business and leadership space. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience of running a business and why you're now helping others in this space?
Sure, yeah. So I started a company called Lillian back in 2013, and I saw a concept up in the US. I was living in the US with my husband, and I just saw this explosion of this business up there with this concept and a business model. And I thought, well, if it's going to work here, it can work in Australia. And we'd always wanted to move back to Australia as well. So I thought, okay, let's do it. Let's jump in. Let's, being me, myself, and I, not let us. Just saw the concept in the US and then started from scratch. I started with $15,000 and built it into a $4.5 million per year company, actually within 2 years. Which is pretty crazy. I learned a lot, and I really felt like, at uni I did business and psychology, and I've always had a heart for people. And Lillian was actually called Lillian because it was the name of our daughter that we've never had actually, but it means pure blessing. And I really felt like everything I do is really authentic, and I felt like this was a beautiful name for, really, in essence, even though we sold, it was a jewelry company, so we sold lockets, charms, and chains. But I always said, we are more than about lockets, chains, and charms. We're about empowering women. We're about being a part of something bigger than ourselves. So I guess the reason why I've kind of transitioned into empowering people and leaders of the world is because I have it's an extension of myself. I have a real heart for people and for us to be living the best version of ourselves.
Now, your reference there to calling it Lillian because it's the female child that you never had. One of the things that I find, and I know Tom has had businesses, that's your husband, and I recently spoke to him in the podcast, thus the connection, which I appreciate him suggesting that I sit down with you based on your business experience.
He's my biggest cheerleader.
I got that from our conversation off camera. But look, that whole concept is, I know because I have multiple sort of fingers in multiple pies, and I don't have kids, but I look at my business enterprises as kids because they're always wanting a piece of my attention. So to hear you suggest that you've named it after the child, technically it is your baby.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly when I birthed it from nothing but a concept, and that's really children, isn't it? That's that's what we do, and we commit our whole lives to a child, and that's exactly what I did. And actually, one of the reasons why I sold the company as well was because of that. the dedication I had given it for 6 years. And raising a real child is definitely way harder on different levels.
Yeah.
But I mean, man, I sometimes I say I near killed myself doing that. Yeah.
It's interesting because there has been analogies made about the growth of the infancy of a business. Then, it starts to grow, and then it's in its teen years, and they are the difficult years. That's where you're sort of looking at scaling and whether you want to go down that path. And some people don't. They stay in the infancy because of the fear, so therefore they never evolve it into like the more adult stage of a business. So stages of a business have been likened to the stages of a child as well. What you're most passionate about is you've been working in this like business to customer or business to client type
B2C space.
B2C space with your business you built up that you recently sold. But you're now recognizing from your experience with working with your employees that the employment engagement side of business is lacking at the moment.
We identify so much with our work. It's kind of an extension of who we are while we're here. It says, the first thing when you're at a party, it's like, hi, my name's Mel, you are, and you answer Craig, and then I say, oh, what do you do, Craig? It's the first question we ever ask anyone. So it's a real identifier of who we are. So yeah, I think that there's this relatability of who we are in the workplace, and we can really relate to that.
There's some statistics that you've shared on your website, which we'll link in the description.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what isn't happening and why you've chosen this space as an area that you believe needs work and that you can help businesses with?
Yeah, there was actually a study done, and an economist, he's studying this relationship between who we are as a person and our output at work. And it's funny, you think, what's an economist studying that for? Like the psychology of humans in work. But it makes sense, the relationship we have at work and our output, like I said earlier, is really closely related. And I've kind of been identifying this for a long time because I worked in the corporate world before I started in my own businesses. And so I've been in leadership, and I've been in leadership since I was all of 21, and I failed forward a lot. I learned how not to be a leader in those early stages by being such a bad leader. So there's this natural tendency, I think, for me, because I just have such a heart for helping people, and because that essence of who we are is so closely related to our work. And the gap I'm finding in some of the statistics that you spoke about is on my website is that Gallup has done this research over many, many years and hundreds of thousands of employees across the world. And what they've found is that 86%, that's a really big number. So 86 out of 100 employees, 86 employees are disengaged in the workplace. And that is a really big number, and that's really startling. And so when I think back to as my own business, having my own business, how many of my employees were possibly disengaged? And I think the biggest problem is that as a leader, we're really unaware of that. It's happening right under our noses in corporations across Australia and New Zealand, and those statistics are pertaining to Australia and New Zealand, 86%. And of that 86%, 15% of those 86 are actively disengaged. And what that means is that actively disengaged employees will actually go out of their way to basically cause havoc in the workplace. They turn up, they're pissed off, they really don't want to be there, they're gossiping, they're intentionally, checked out in a meeting, they do not want to be there, and they are just causing havoc in the workplace. So if that's a real statistic, which it is, it's backed up by evidence of what Gallup has done in the States and around the world, is that's a real problem, and it's costing companies a lot of money. And I found, when I look back at my career, and even as a leader myself of a company with 20 plus employees, plus a sales force of 2,000 consultants, we had a dedicated trainer at my company, and we taught a lot of leadership skills and so forth. But I look back at my career, and the amount of leadership training I had in order to become a leader was almost none.
Sure.
And so what's happening is that we're not leading on purpose. We're kind of just letting it happen, and people are failing forward a lot. And it's happening where, CEOs and executives are not aware just how disengaged their workforce is and how unproductive that is.
So it's a problem in Australia, and I'm sure it's international, but I will say this, based on people I have spoken to, on people with a passion, that a lot of people with a passion that I've spoken to who are working in an environment under an employee have indicated to me constantly that they've had good mentors, and this concept of a mentor who can guide you through that process. So what you're doing is actually providing that opportunity, having your broad experience now, to provide mentorship around, what you can do to improve engagement with your employees to get better outcomes and productivity for your business. So do you want to talk to a couple of the strategies that may help businesses and leaders engage their employees?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so, and that's a really great term, is mentorship, because it all starts at the top. Culture is created from the top down, and culture has been said that culture is created either on purpose or by accident. And I see the same thing with leadership. So if you're not consciously, the thing is that companies will, they will always be looking at the numbers around, customer acquisition or average sale per customer, all of those KPI and metrics on balance sheets and P&Ls and you name it. But what companies are not doing is they're not ever focusing on the numbers around culture or developing a cultural strategy. They're always developing a business plan or always developing a marketing strategy. They're measuring the ROI on marketing, but they're never developing a culture strategy around, okay, what is the culture that we want to create here on purpose? Because the thing is that culture will get created whether you do it on purpose or not. And the same thing happens with leadership. So no one ever sets at the beginning of the fiscal year, this is our marketing strategy, this is our sales strategy, so on and so forth. And here is our leadership strategy. This is how we're going to improve employee engagement, because first of all, they're not even aware that their employees are engaged. It's happening right under the noses. They're not aware of it. And so there are a couple of things that are really important for employers to be able to start to identify. And that's what I kind of do with companies, is we start to have a look at really simply what are the signifiers that can tell you the levels of engagement of your employees, because it's really hard to know.
Are you able to provide a couple of examples of what those indicators may be?
Yeah, they're actually really simple, and I've actually leaned on Gallup and their research, because I don't have an R&D team behind me to do any of this,
sure.
and that costs a lot of money, obviously, to be able to find that information. And they've spent millions and millions of dollars doing that. So I really lean on what Gallup have done. And they provide a Q12 questionnaire across, and they've refined it. So running with that as a tool. So it really identifies 4 different areas within the employee, starting with their basic needs through to their individual needs, the team needs. And so there's different aspects of who we are, because we don't, who we are as an individual is important. We don't separate ourselves. We don't get to work and then, we do show up a little bit different, versus how we sit in the couch in our PJs versus how we show up at work. But for the most part, because we're there so long, we're who we are wherever we go. And so there's some basic needs that are identified, and it's simple, and it sounds really too simple, but I've really found in business that it's the little things that you want to focus on. And so it's little things like the basic needs are, do I even know what my job is? Do I know what my job description is? And I've got some really great examples of that, where as an executive, I've seen an executive who's directly reporting to a CEO, that directive coming from the CEO was shifting every other day or every week, because they didn't have a real strategy of how he wanted to achieve his goals. That he would jump on the phone with that executive, be like, okay, this is the directive, this is what we're going to focus on. And then 3 days later it would shift. Do you think that executive knows what their job is. And I know that sounds really basic. Like, of course you know what your job is, but that's a really great live example where an executive who's responsible for, I think they were responsible for a sales force of, 75 team members, they didn't know what their job description looked like because their direct report, which is the CEO, who's the guy who's steering the ship, or female, but in this case it was a guy, was not clear on their own strategy. And so it's little things like that which are really quite big, where employees are rocking up to work. And here's the thing with disengagement. Employees will do just enough not to get fired. And that's what's happening across those 71%, because then the other 15% are actually like antagonizing other people and, trying to make life hell for everyone else.
Yeah, so there may be some people watching who had that experience where they're at work, but they might be people that are poking their thumb in the side of the business.
I think we can all be guilty of that. We're all probably sitting there going, oh, I wouldn't do that, but actually I probably have.
Yeah, so, or and it could even not necessarily, it could be any organisation you belong to that there's a potential for that. So even though you might love and be engaged in your business environment as an employee in what you do, so you're not in that 84% that's disengaged, you might be in another organisation as a volunteer, or in another environment where you are that person, and say, hey, well, okay, why?
So they're asking questions like, do you know what your role entails? Are you given the equipment and the tools to be able to do that? And then it moves on a little bit and it looks at, has someone identified your skills and mentioned it to you? Has someone given you some positive feedback in the last X number of days or months? Has someone talked about advancement? And these kind of things sound really basic and simple. And it's like, of course that's happening. But actually when they surveyed, they found that these simple things were not actually happening. And I think that's a great example of the executive where it's like, whoa, you would think that someone earning $100,000 plus would kind of know what their job entails. But that's the kind of leadership that's out there.
Yeah, sure.
And so if you've got a leader leading a company with, hundreds of employees, and that's the kind of behavior that they attribute, then what expectation do you have for your own leaders beneath you?
So one thing that I think is a potential opportunity for business is to, if they're really engaging in their employees as leaders, is potentially encouraging those employees to ask for the opportunities to be more engaged, whether that be training or involved in processes, or even just in feedback and complaints. So you say it sounds so simple, but and there may be a number of simple solutions. So while you're focused on this leadership down approach, you could a good leader probably is looking for, yes, I'm leading, but it's really an employee up approach. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does. And it's interesting because when I'm with leaders and I'm doing a leadership course around how you can become a better leader, I'm always like, well, whose responsibility is it for your engagement of your employees? And it's always directed at, the answer is yours. Of course it's yours. But if I'm with employees and I'm talking about being engaged or disengaged in your workplace, and I ask the same question, because it goes two ways. It goes twofold. But the thing is that most people, we've learned in society to kind of, we turn up to a workplace and we are looking for the identifiers, the key aspects of this workplace, the people within it. How am I showing up here? How am I supposed to show up? Like, what's the expectations? Is it okay to take a lunch break? Like, is that even okay? Or is it kind of code that you eat at your desk and you kind of inhale your food? So we kind of turn up as an employee to go, okay, this is how it's done here. Most of us are not turning up, particularly in Australia. I feel like no one wants to be the tall poppy. We kind of we don't turn up rolling up our sleeves and going, okay, well, I'm gonna, I've got my eyes set on this leadership and advancement and make, that's making too many waves. So we turn up and go, how are things done here? Because then I'm going to fit in within that.
So it's an interesting thing that I've seen affect organisations myself, where I feel if people have ambition, they should own it and tell everyone, because that within itself can fester if people think people are trying to because we do have the tall poppy
We
syndrome
do.
here, and it does. People don't realise how limiting it is. When people start to get ahead, others seem to want to stifle them and keep them, and and even say we don't do that here.
Yeah,
and that doesn't allow for the growth of an organisation. It actually is a limiting thing, and that's what I found from talking to people overseas is they actually engage each other in growth. Now, I don't know whether that's across the board. It's still a culture. But from people I speak to, something that I've found is, and even Tom talked about it in his, because he's had a different experience. He's from America. So
yeah, and he's from the East Coast as well, which is different again.
And he talks about, and others talk about, mentors and that really encouraging growth. And there was one instance, the list of 100 dreams, I interviewed an author, and he was saying in his existing job, he's an author, but in his existing job, his boss basically said, I'm prepping you to take my job in 4 or 5 years' time.
Wow, that's unique. That's really unique. And like you said, particularly in Australia. In fact, the US judge them as we do in Australia. They have some of the most engaged employees. So I think that there's something that we can learn from kind of ditching this tall poppy syndrome thing that we've been carrying around for far too long. It's like, enough already. And I think that if we are focused on the bigger mission that's at play within our companies, I know that some companies are about selling widgets and that's their focus, and they're focused on that bottom line and that's the culture they've created. But there's plenty of companies out there that are about more than selling widgets. They're, like I said, about selling more than lockets, chains and charms. They're about something bigger than that. And I think that if the more you can engage your employees around that, the better. And if we can kind of all, as employees, turn up to our workplaces thinking about how can I contribute, as opposed to, this thought process of what can you give me first and then I'll see, I'll front. Well, you're only paying me, 60 grand a year.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to give you.
So interestingly, judgment is what can stifle people's growth, is worried about being judged. Is that something that you've identified in your work, that's you're seeing that as well, that's why employees are being less engaged, is because they're worried about the judgment of their peers?
Yeah, that happens across the board in Australia. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a big thing. I think that there's so many aspects to it, that's kind of one slither. But a lot of it really is about kind of those everyday things. And I think also too, the workplace is changing faster than it's ever changed before. There's a blended workforce that we've never had. We've got the Gen...
What are we up to?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Actually, let me come from the other side. We've got the baby boomers who are hanging around a lot longer than they used to, and there's a lot more females in the baby boomers than, before. They're coming back into the workforce. Maybe they stayed at home with their kids, but they're coming back into the workforce. So we've got that end, and then we've got the new generation, Gen Z, that are starting to come into the workforce now. They're starting to come out of university. So you've got a real blended age in the workforce. And then you've got technological changes. They're happening so fast. People are actually a little bit afraid for their jobs. They're like, whoa, I do this kind of task where is technology going to overtake? Is my job going to be relevant in 5 to 10 years? That's how fast our technology is changing with AI and so forth. So we're seeing a shift where leaders right now really need to, I really believe, because of those big shifts, I really believe leaders need to be conscious. They need to be, like I spoke about earlier, about having that leadership strategy. More than any other time until now, is it more important as it is now to have that leadership strategy in place and just do leadership on purpose. That's my kind of thing. It's like, have a bit of a think about the leadership strategy you have at your workplace from the top down, and what kind of skills are you upskilling your leaders around? Are you what kind of actions? I always like to look at the actions. The values, obviously the values have importance in a workplace, but just that word, I don't know what you think about when you hear of values, but it's kind of like, God, is it 1983? Like we've had that word thrown around for so long, and you go into a corporation, it's 5 on the wall or 7 on the wall or 12 on the wall, and you can't remember how many there are or what they are or what they even mean, because all they are is on the wall.
So that's devaluing the word value there.
Big time. That way. Yeah.
But yeah, look, I'm big on standards. I think you have to have accountability. So, but I think what you're alluding to is action. Just to have it there isn't the same as actioning it. Like knowing it and doing it are two different things.
Yeah, 100%. And what I like to do with leaders in organizations is have a look at the actions and think about what kind of actions you're putting in place. So what I do with leaders in workplaces is we do a leadership strategy. I help them put together a leadership strategy, and we don't choose 12 things that we're going to focus on. It's 3 to 5. And it is always based on a value. So it could be commitment, integrity, whatever value that they value in their workplace, or that they want to implement as a leader. But then it's looking at what is the action behind that? How will I display that? Because then that's tangible. I can get behind that and I can understand that. And then I can display that for my team members, and then they'll know what commitment looks like. So it might be that I'm a committed leader because I display I do what I say I'm going to do, or when I set an expectation of something that I'm going to do, I set that expectation and I say how many by when. I say I'm going to get this thing done and I'm going to get it done by this date. And then if I can't meet that timeline, I get with you and I make a new agreement. One of the biggest things that happens in leadership is this over-promising and under-delivering. We talk about that a lot with the consumer. But the fact of the matter is that employees are doing it all day long. Of course, they're not going to meet the customer's expectations or over-deliver on customer service, because they're not even doing it with their direct report. And our direct reports are not holding people accountable either. So you mentioned about accountability to the action. So it's two things. It's one, the expectation, setting that expectation. This is what it looks like with the actions beneath that. And then second to that is holding people accountable to that, including themselves as leaders, and owning up and go, you know what? I know I said I was going to do X, Y, Z by this date. I want to own that I didn't do that, or I didn't communicate and check back in with you and let you know that I wasn't going to be able to meet that date. Because that's happening all over the place.
So one of the things that you've done is a number of conferences. You also do keynote speaking, and you do individual mentoring. So there are and is opportunities for people who are leaders, if they don't want to attend the conference or the training or the keynote, that they can touch base with you to get a one-on-one mentoring situation to help them identify how they can better engage their employees.
And how they can become a better leader themselves, and I think that it's time to get to have a different lens on leadership, and I feel like that's why I call myself the leadership futurist, is that I'm really looking under a different lens. It's like, let's flip leadership on its head a little bit. It's kind of been done this way, the way it's been done for way too long, and it's not getting the results. Let's look at conscious leadership. Let's look at leadership on purpose. Let's get a leadership strategy in place and have a look at not just these set of values, which someone might write down in a conference and then throw away in the bin or leave it. How many conferences have we been to where might be the last one heading out and we see everyone's notes on the tables? It's that real actionable leadership that I can take back into my workplace and be better as a leader. The interesting thing we've found with the study that Gallup has done is that actually, even though in Australia and New Zealand there's 86% of employees are disengaged, what they've found is that, and I'm not sure if they have a percentage around it, but what they've found is that most people actually do want to be engaged. They're just, it's a bit of a victim story. They're coming from no responsibility themselves, but they're kind of saying, hey, actually, workplace, I would actually like an environment in which I can be engaged and be my best at work. Because that's one of the questions they ask as well is, are you provided the environment in which you can be the best you can be at your workplace? And a lot of them answer no.
And they're good questions to ask, and I think asking those questions of your employees is probably the first step, because I know I've worked for a number of organisations a long time ago, and I don't know that I ever did a survey or any sort of thing internally where I was even asked, are we looking after you as an employee? Right. It's automatically assume that we're giving you a wage, so we must be.
Yeah.
And you're turning up to work, so we must be.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really great notice, Craig. And that's exactly what's happening. And that complacency, it means disengaged employees, and it's costing us millions of dollars. I mean, I've seen workplaces where and there's, again, I should really remember percentages when I'm going to start quoting statistics, although I do have a favourite joke that 47% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
I have one that says 3 out of 2 people have trouble with fractions. So
we're both as funny as each other.
Sure, that's going to get comments or laughs on this, but yeah, no, we're not comedians, that's for sure.
I like to think I am. But yes, there is a statistic, and I can't remember what it was pertaining to. Anyway,
that's all right. We might be able to come back to that anyway.
That's okay.
So you and your workforce that you had while you were running Lillian was primarily a female workforce, and how do you see? And you were working to engage them. You held internal conferences and
100%.
Constantly learning, like giving them opportunities to learn, not only about the products, but about themselves.
Yes.
How important do you think it is for females to be engaged, to give them the opportunities to build their leadership skills?
I think it's equally as important as males. I don't think that there's any difference between whether a female needs to learn more about being a leader or a male.
Yep.
I think what happens though, and remember I said that I failed forward a lot as a leader when I was very, very young in corporate. I worked for Australia's largest travel agency for 10 years. So I felt really fortunate to get that groundwork beneath me and really learn what failure as a leader looked like, so that then I could learn what good leadership looked like. What we do find, though, obviously, because there's this disparity between opportunity, and there's actually been a study done in the States, which Melinda Gates talks about a lot, because she's really pressing on this, closing the gap between male and female. And what they've found is that the disparity between wages is absolutely a thing. Like, there are companies who are not paying, because in the workforce, what also happens is that you get to say how much you want to get paid, because first person who speaks loses, right? That's negotiation 101. So they always get to go, well, how much are you thinking of getting paid for this job? And what they're finding is that there is a disparity. Now, there could be a suggestion that females are undervaluing themselves, and I think that's a contextually cultural thing that we need to get over, for sure. But there's also this study that's been done that they had a look at, okay, why is there such a disparity between how men are being paid and how women are being paid? And it actually wasn't women, it was mums. So what's happening is that women are having children because we're the ones that physically do. And then there's this old adage of us staying at home for a little while as well, and part of that is a physical aspect as well. You know, obviously with women, they're probably breastfeeding, so there's this physical aspect of staying home with a child for a certain amount of time. Of course, there's other solutions around that, but what I'm saying, I'm not advocating either way. I'm talking about what is here. And so what's happening is that women are staying home longer. They're possibly the ones that are taking maternity leave. There may not even be parental leave for the husband or the father, rather, to be staying home. So what's happening over time is that women are, and then perhaps they're doing school hours to be home for their children. And I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with any of what I'm saying, but what's happening is that women are then disadvantaged when they're trying to go back into the workplace because their male counterparts have stayed in their roles. They haven't stepped out of their workplace to be able to look after their children. So they're getting advancements, they're getting promotions with more experience, with higher pay. So that's actually a big disparity of what the reason why there's that disparity between how men are getting paid and how women are getting paid. It's actually mums, which we have to figure out. That's a thing, and we have to figure that out. And as a woman and as a mum myself, although I've been in business myself, and that has its own set of challenges with being a woman in business. And we could go all day about men versus women and equality, but that's not what this podcast is about. But what we're finding is that, a lot of my mum friends are having this real struggle with how to enter back into the workforce. So if anyone's out there thinking of a business idea, I think there's real space for being able to support women who are looking to enter back into the workforce. Just a top tip for the day.
Yeah, we're talking off camera a little bit about employment and that there's a big or there's not necessarily a big move, but there is a shift in the way some people are looking at HR as opposed to looking at lists of information on a piece of paper and just finding out about people as people, and sitting down over coffee and just having a chat, as opposed to, oh, what have you done? And because ultimately your employee is a person, and what they're often done, and we've all done it with our resumes, it's highly embellished. So
Yeah.
it's like you are selling yourself. So it might be true, but the wording sounds like you were CEO of the world's most successful company 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the other is true too. And I don't know whether this is, I've never looked at any research on this, but I find in real life experience, like I've looked at some of my male counterparts from my experience with the travel agency and looked at some of their LinkedIn profiles, and I was working alongside some of those male colleagues and going, hang on a minute, we had the same job, but the way that you titled your position versus how I title mine is way different. And I think, I don't know whether this is a sexist comment or not, but I think that guys kind of don't have a problem kind of embellishing, but we tend to be the opposite. And again, there's always outliers, but collectively, I think women tend to kind of shy away from embellishing or even maybe telling the truth.
Yes. Yeah, but that may come around back to judgment too, and that tall poppy syndrome, particularly here in Australia.
Yeah.
People are worried about that perception, whereas some blokes, I know when I was younger, and I probably still do, you have a degree of ego and confidence. And I think that carries you through your work life as well. You feel confident, even if you're not, you have this delusion that potentially...
Bravado.
Yeah, bravado, yeah. And I think there is... And with leadership, I do think not all leaders possess those traits, but there are leaders that possess those bravado and egotistical and highly confident traits, whereas the rest of the workforce is looking at them going, you're not as good as you think you are, which is that same perception of what gets written on that LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's not to have a go at them, but the point is that resume, and LinkedIn's almost an online resume these days, there is a sell there. You're selling yourself like you're selling a car, or you're selling your trinkets and your lockets and all those sorts of things. So if you're good at selling yourself, and we alluded to that off camera as well, if you're selling, females need to sell themselves as well. It's not all on the other side. When it comes to opportunity, you need to state your value. I find something that's really interesting. There's a big discussion in the US with their politics around minimum wage over there. And one thing I'm very conscious of, and I'm always conscious when people come and guest, is time is absolutely our most valuable resource. As individuals, we have limited time here. We can walk out, God forbid, out the door and not be here tomorrow.
Sure.
And yet there are people in the US getting paid $7 or $9 an hour.
100%.
That to me is the biggest insult to the human race. And there's people in other countries getting a lot less.
Right.
What they're basically saying is your time on this planet that is limited, and we talk about limited resources and infinite resources, time is limited, and they're saying, which I find is an insult, you're worth only $7 per hour of your life.
Right.
When you put it in that perspective, I think people need to value themselves higher than what the world is valuing them at. And
it's tricky because I think commodities are, it's become, because of globalization, it's become such a, even with technology, the world is kind of flattened out. So it's really easy for us to, in developing countries, they have products, goods and services that they've never had before because of advancements in technology and transportation and so on and so forth. I think commoditization has really shifted the way that whole aspect of what you just spoke about, because the thing is that if you look at the gig economy, it sounds fabulous that you can have this time freedom, and that's also shifting in the workplaces. Before I was talking about shifts in workplace, the gig economy and this whole work-life balance, we've been talking about that for 20 odd years, work-life balance, but it's really coming, it's here. Like people want flexibility, and that's another thing that they've found with disengaged employees, is that they feel like they are not being heard, or that because I think we've kind of separated the individual from their work individual for too long. And I think that we need to remember that they are an individual, and work is a component of their life, and so too is the rest of their life. So that needs to be blended. But going back to what you were saying, you can have a look at some of those gig economy websites, where people are farming out their experience, whether it's carpentry or even driving people around for whatever name company.
Yes.
There's no sponsorship going on here. That, we're, I guess, permitting ourselves by doing those things, we're selling ourselves out for a lot less just to kind of get the gig, which is not doing ourselves any favors. But I think that that's true because it's just becoming this. It's good on one hand because everyone gets access now. Everyone can put themselves out there and go, I can do your books for you. Even if they're going to walk into an absolute schmozzle of a, I haven't done my taxes for 5 years and I've got receipts everywhere, but you'll do it for $50.
It's interesting. One of the things in a business I previously had, I was charging hourly rates for a number of years, and then I went to a menu style where it was just piece rate, where it was like, I do this for you. And you pay me X amount of dollars, regardless of whether it takes me 5 minutes or an hour.
5 hours.
Or 5 hours. And because I knew roughly what the time was. And it could take more than what I felt it would too. It was IT.
Yep.
And I identified very quickly that this whole concept of linking money and time is a bad idea from an employment point of view.
Yeah.
Not everyone's in that position, but it's something that I noticed that millionaires and billionaires actually do is they don't link their actual money and time. They'll have you do it as an employee, but they're going to charge X amount of dollars. It's X amount of dollars for me to do that.
Right.
And they're not saying for an hour or whatever. It's just like, that's what it is. Yep. It's no different when you're selling a trinket. You're charging X amount of dollars for that trinket. But our time, which is our limited resource, I'm banging on about that a little bit, but I just thought I'd raise that topic while we're talking about business, of something that I identified in my business when we're talking about how you value yourself, that the people who employ you aren't necessarily working the same way as they expect you to work. And while you can't do a piece rate like as an employee, you need to be aware that you bring value to those businesses and you bring value to those companies that in some of those instances can run into the millions of dollars. You're making someone millions of dollars and they're not operating the same way as you, meaning linking money to hours.
Time.
Yeah, and that's...
Yeah, it is a mindset shift. And I think that it's challenging because what I've found, even for myself, that being in business, that sounds glorious and it sounds amazing. And while I've had that success with Lillian and prior to that, it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of risk and it doesn't always work out. I had entrepreneurial parents who were such an inspiration for me growing up and still are, but they've had ups and downs with business. And then also personal things can come into it as well. My dad had a really bad accident when he was only 30 and he had a business where he was working physically. And so, life is what it is and it's challenging. But I think what can happen is that we can tend to kind of get caught in the rat race. And then big thing I love talking about at the moment is because when I sold the business, I also went through a bit of a midlife crisis. I was turning 40, and so that can kind of happen when you have a bit of a midlife crisis. It was a good one, though.
By the way, you're about the third person I've spoken to recently, and I'm in my mid-40s.
Yeah.
And I've, moved out of the IT space and into this space and have got something happening on the side that's keeping me going while I build up a new business.
Yeah.
But I've done all the questioning. It seems like 40 seems to be this number for all of us, where we might have a passion for something and then we seem to be reassessing things and still using all our experience and resources, but maybe it's a reassessment and people stay with what they're doing. Go, no, I really am. This is where I am and this is who I am. But then we seem to be diverting and around this midlife crisis. Yeah. So talk about that.
Well,
go into that.
Look, I think we're one of the lucky ones. I think that, or one of the brave ones, or because it is very brave for me right now because I did sell my business and I am going into something new. So that's quite a challenge and not everyone can do that. So I think that, and it is safe sometimes to go into a job and who knows, maybe that's what I'll do while I'm building this, because at the end of the day, we've got to pay our bills. We've got to feed our faces, right? So it's a little bit challenging to go, okay, midlife crisis, turn 40, have a new look on life, and okay, that's it. I'm going to go throw caution to the wind, and I'm going to, just start this new thing. Well, meanwhile, we've got a mortgage. Meanwhile, we've got children at school. But I think what's happened in society, though, is, and this may never shift. It could just be a thing. But we tend to focus way too much about achievement and getting stuff. Like the bigger the house you can get, especially these days, the size footage of our house compared to the number of children, a family size is just disproportionate. It's ridiculous. So I think that that's a problem as well. We need to kind of stop with this fast fashion. We need to stop, thinking that we need all this stuff to prove who we are, and to be a mirror of who we are. Because in essence, we all know that at some point we're all going to go somewhere else, and we can't take any of it with us. So that's the kind of midlife crisis I had, where it's like we sold everything, sold the business, we sold our block of land, traded the Mercedes back in, just to kind of step back a little bit and go, is this what I really wanted? Because what I noticed is that I had learned, which it feels really encouraging, and it's something that I think I'm probably even doing with our son TJ, is that we're teaching, you can be anything or anybody when you grow up. You can be anything you want to be. And success seems to be the thing that we kind of get communicated to as we grow up. And so this level of achievement in society it's really important, especially in Western society. But what I noticed is once I had it, once I achieved it, I was like, there's no cheese down this tube. What? This isn't what I thought it was going to be. What have you been talking about my entire life, people? It wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
So the reference, I think, that sums up what I think most people actually are pursuing is that pursuit of happiness. And what is happiness, and how do we define it? And I think people go looking for that in material things. We
need to redefine what that looks like. And I think changing it from happiness to fulfillment, just that shift. Because it's different. Because I did feel happy in a beautiful home. I did feel happy driving my Mercedes. But there was no fulfillment in that.
From a sporting perspective that Tom would probably appreciate when he watches this, that's your husband.
He will watch it. Oh, mind you, I haven't watched all of his yet, so better get on that.
Right. So there's a saying we have when we're teaching athletes what's important now, which is win, W-I-N. And I think what happens and what's happened at 40 is you almost step back and you go, wait a minute, what's important now? And the real winning comes from actually asking that question. Is this what I thought was important? Is it really that important? And then you start all the self-assessment, the reassessment, and the midlife crisis stuff, and then you come out of it going with a clearer perspective. 9 times out of 10, I would think. Some people may not, but I know my experience asking those questions, and I don't even think you realise you're aware you're going through it. Actually, you just start to question everything.
Yeah, you do, don't you?
Your friends, everything. It's just like it's all these question marks about is this. It's definitely a growth journey there. That some books need to be written on. Maybe from talking to people with a passion, that might be the first book I write.
There you go.
Yeah, like it's something I'm seeing coming up multiple times, and in talking to you, to hear you say that and have the third, it's almost like the universe speaks to you when you hear 3 people in 3 interviews all talking about that. Maybe it's because I'm speaking to 40-year-olds at the moment.
Maybe
they've all gone through that same process.
That's a flattering comment for Tom.
Well, I think he was one earlier that, but he has the mind of a young man.
Doesn't
absolutely.
he? Yeah.
He doesn't think his age, which
100%. And does not act his age either. In that he's really athletic and really healthy, and I think it's a really healthy questioning, and I think it's part of the journey. I think it's exactly what we're supposed to do. I think it's really healthy, though, and the reason why I say that is to stop. I think that sometimes people will question it, but they'll continue going because they'll have that pressure of, well, I have this big house with this big mortgage, I have the children in private school, and they feel a lot of pressure to kind of keep that, and a lot of society's pressure or just self-pressure. But what's also happening is that a lot of people are going, screw it, I'm going to downsize, I'm going to go work around the world, or I'm going to get a caravan and go travel around Australia, or, and it doesn't need to be that extreme, but I just think it's really healthy to question, because I think that's part of our journey. I think it leads us to the next part of who we are as an evolving consciousness.
Yeah. So let's talk about if we're having this so-called midlife crisis, we've got to then assume that there are people who are employed. So we come back to employment, employees, and their satisfaction that obviously must be getting to this age as well.
Good point.
Where they're going through these similar sort of questions, and are we as employers addressing those?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, not in my experience. I don't think that's part of anyone's corporate business plan, is to go, hang on, let's have a look at our workforce and divide them up and have a look at, that's actually a really good thought, kind of dividing them up and going, okay, the needs analysis around a Gen Z that's coming in, or into someone into their 30s that's really pushing, because you're kind of in your jive in your 30s, you got some experience under your belt, you got some promotions, you got some confidence, you're just, hell for leather, you're just going for it. And then, what about our 30s to 40s, still going for it? Okay, 40s. Well, let's have a look at those employees and going, how are we providing the environment for which they are? Sometimes it's really healthy to actually let some of those employees go and not try and hang on.
Yeah.
And not try and facilitate growth within your company, because sometimes it's really healthy for them, and that's going to be a win-win. If they're off going and doing something else at some other organisation, like I said, it doesn't mean you can throw caution to the wind and just quit your job. Got to pay our bills, that's okay. But maybe there's something over here. I have the belief, with my own personal experience, that we're kind of born with a passion within us, and it can get nurtured. But I kind of feel like that's been my experience anyway. When I grew up, I've always said that I wanted to be an entrepreneur or a backup dancer to Madonna.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a bit weird. But what apparently I used to always say, Dad always reminds me now that I've been going through this midlife crisis, and maybe he's reminded me my whole life, but I haven't been ready to hear it.
Yeah.
Whenever we would drive anywhere, we drove everywhere, because you didn't fly anywhere back in the day. So we would drive everywhere for long hours to, a holiday destination, whatever, or just driving around town. And back then we had tapes, and Dad would always pop in a tape. We'd be like, okay, enough with the tapes, let's put on the radio to listen to some music. But we would always listen to motivational tapes. Zig Ziglar, you name it, we were listening to it growing up, which I feel really fortunate about. But apparently I would always say, and I don't remember any of this, I would always say, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a speaker. I want to be a motivational speaker.
Yeah. So I have a take on that too. So interestingly, I have asked people this on my show, this concept of child's play. What were you doing when you were a child? Because my child's play has actually come to fruition to be stuff that I did as an adult.
Interesting.
So I find it interesting. So I can just rattle some of this stuff off, but there was always, my child's play wasn't, I consider, normal in the sense of, I produced a computer newsletter at the age of 10 because my parents had a business. So,
that's not normal. Yeah.
So, and I sold it for 10 cents, and I used to they had all the equipment, the photocopiers and that. And and then I later on did journalism.
Yeah, sure.
So I never thought of that as something that I would be doing. And it wasn't. It was actually a counsellor who said, "Why you good at this? Why don't you? You're writing for the school, yearbook. Why don't you do journalism?" I'd never even given a thought to it.
Yeah, right.
And then until it was said to me, and I thought, you know what? I'm actually doing this. I didn't even realise and see it as that. Radio. I had a makeshift radio station in my bedroom. Around the same age, with microphone. My parents gave me the old record, and I'd play the records, and I'd record, and I'd pretend to be a radio announcer, and I did radio and things. So I had that experience. And I coached soccer at the age of 10. I would coach 8 and 9-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
Like, just because they'd asked me to.
Yeah.
And I bought a book, and I did all that stuff, and that's what I went on to do with my life. So I often do ask, like, what were you doing as a child, and did that translate when you were older, when you talk about finding your passion and pursuing it as a source of, I guess, income?
Yeah.
So for me, what I've done always feels like child's play. It's like I never grew up, and I know not everyone has that experience, but I'm keen that those who have
explore that,
those who have turned their passion into a business, I'm keen to know what they were like as a child, and whether that's just an extension of their child's play.
Yeah. Well, definitely my career options that I've chosen kind of correlate to that. I'll bet not the backup dancer to Madonna.
Yeah.
Didn't ever explore that. but I think about that. So I was doing, dance, concerts in my living room. And then, I don't know if this is the story I've been telling everyone or myself, but I think I remember like charging people 50 cents to come and look at it. And it's like, Mum's like, yeah, I saw you practicing. I'm not going to pay you 50 cents. And then, so then there's also, I just really enjoyed being organized, and I'm a really good operator. So I don't say that I'm an entrepreneur. The reason why Lillian was so successful is because I'm a really good operator. So I'm a really good COO, better than a CEO.
Yeah.
But underlying everything I've done has always been about empowering other people. So I think if I the child's play was there, but if I look a little bit deeper, the essence of, because the thing can be an extension and that's the play, but then digging a little bit deeper, there's always been this essence of inspiring and empowering people. Always. And, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that is important too, to consider if you're someone who's stuck in something where you're not happy, potentially going back to your childhood and think about the things that you may have dreamed about being, and just taking that step and talking to the inner child and saying, is this something that I didn't pursue because of judgment? Like, you never become the dancer for Madonna, but maybe that was around judgment, maybe because people wouldn't pay you the 50 cents at that point in time, where you thought you were worth that, and obviously they didn't see that value, but that doesn't mean that potential wasn't there. So I don't know, but
I don't know the answer either.
We tend to stop doing things based on judgment. But here's something I learned from radio that I'll share, and I'll try and wrap it up. Is I interviewed a number of independent artists, and I used to play all sorts of genres of music, and I never for the life of me liked half of what I played. It was never about me. And same as guests I have on my show, I don't have an opinion on what they believe or whatever, because I'm not the audience.
Sure. And
when I play music, I wasn't the audience. And what I found is people would ring in, and I'd be hating a song, and I'd be in my mind going, like I would never say it, but I'd be thinking, this is just like rubbish. But I gave them airplay. That was called the Craig Rowe airplay show, the crap show. So I used to play the music, right? And people would ring in on the worst songs, and they go, oh, what's this called? And I'm in my mind, I'm going, are you serious? But I'd tell them, and I'd give them the information they needed. But what it demonstrated for me is that, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So you might not have been the world's best dancer, but guaranteed someone somewhere would have been entertained by you. And I find, even with this podcast, I've had good comments and some weird ones which I take on board, because the way the world perceives you is important. And then I've had great ones. So you get this spectrum of, so judgment's really a really subjective thing based on the person giving the judgment.
100%, yeah.
So to me, I think if you're limiting yourself by judgment of others, then that can stifle your growth, and people need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think just in general, in this whole conversation we've had, I think at the end of the day, the essence of just being is probably really more profound than all of our doing. I think that, we talked about, passion, obviously it's your show. And sometimes in life we're trying to kind of connect that to an output, which will, and you talk about judgment a lot, which will be accepted by general society or segments of society. What if life could really be about us being who we are and who we're born to be, and if whatever we're passionate about, just we exude that, and it doesn't need to look a certain way. It doesn't need to even be a career. It can be something that we just do for fun, It could be me dancing in my living room again, or speaking like this. I want to be speaking, to thousands of people, but it's okay that I'm speaking to, you could have thousands of listeners, I don't know, Craig, but hundreds or tens or one listener. And it's okay.
That is okay, and that's exactly the approach that I think if you're doing and you're looking to do this, people have looked at my numbers, and I don't have a lot of numbers, I must say. I've only just started, but not that worries. An audience of one person for me is still an audience. But interestingly, I might have 250 views or 300 views or something, or downloads or whatever, and people go, oh, that's not a big number. And I say, well, you throw those people into a room and tell me that's not a big number.
Yeah, exactly.
If you were standing
context,
up,
right?
Yeah, context. If you were standing in front of 250 people telling them this, would you say that's not a big number?
Right.
So whose perspective?
Yeah.
So for me, you and I can have a conversation, I'll enjoy the conversation, and if we're an audience to each other's conversation, we gain something from it.
That's it.
That's the value. It's the value to that one person that got value out of it. So that's, again, judgment. Like, to sit in judgment of numbers, and this is what leadership, and you talk about leadership, unfortunately, leaders are forced to project and fulfill numbers and quotas, and they're looking at that, and that may be where we leave it, is that what you're trying to do is say, leaders need to understand that there is a different number, and the number is the value of the employee.
Yep, spot on.
So, Melissa Haupt, I really appreciate the time that you've devoted to me and my audience today in sharing your passion, and I'll put information in the description below for those people that are wanting more help and mentoring in this space, but I really do appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it as well.
I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to comment. If you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be advised of new interviews when they're uploaded. I hope you join us again sometime. Catch you later.